If your stomach feels tight by mid-morning, you're oddly hungry an hour after breakfast, and you need caffeine just to get your bowels moving, there's a very good chance your first meal is working against your gut, not for it. Most adults eat far less fiber than they need. In the United States, average intake sits around 16 grams a day. That shortfall matters far more than most people realize. Your microbiome is not some vague wellness idea. It is a living ecosystem that responds, specifically and measurably, to what you repeatedly put into it. And breakfast is almost always the most repeated meal of the day. A landmark Nature paper showed that changing your diet can begin shifting the gut microbiome within days, not weeks, days, which if you think about it is actually quite remarkable. So when breakfast is sweet cereal, white toast, juice, or one of those so-called healthy bars, you are not doing repair work. You are reinforcing the wrong pattern morning after morning. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The breakfast that does the most good for your gut is usually very plain. No powders, no exotic superfoods, no complicated protocols. It is a bowl built from oats, a fermented base like kefir or live yogurt, berries, ground seeds, and a small handful of nuts. I know that sounds simple. That is exactly the point. Later, I will walk you through the exact way I build it, the mistake that makes even healthy breakfast backfire, and who should ease into this slowly rather than diving straight in. I'm Dr. Steve Collins. This matters to me professionally because so many metabolic and digestive problems trace back to daily habits that look completely harmless. The first thing I pay attention to with breakfast is not calories, not protein content, and not whether it photographs well. I look at one question. Does this meal give your gut microbes something meaningful to do? I make a version of this breakfast for myself regularly because it behaves like good maintenance. Not medicine, not a cure, maintenance. Think of your colon like a fireplace. If you keep tossing in paper, you get a quick flare and then nothing. If you put in the right logs, you get a slower, steadier burn that lasts. Oats are one of those logs. Oats carry soluble fiber, particularly beta-glucan. And that fiber travels through the upper digestive tract largely intact. It reaches the lower gut, where microbes can ferment it into short-chain fatty acids, including something called butyrate. Butyrate is one of the primary fuels for the cells that line your colon. That is one of the key ways your gut lining gets support day after day. I am not going to overstate the evidence here. A bowl of oats is not a miracle cure. It does not instantly create a perfect microbiome. But we have solid reasons to take it seriously. The NIH highlighted in 2022 that different fibers produce genuinely different microbial benefits, including measurable increases in beneficial bacteria, and oats remain one of the most practical and accessible ways to begin that process every morning. A question I get often, does it have to be overnight oats? No, but soaking oats overnight or cooking them gently on the stovetop tends to make them easier to tolerate for many people. And that matters enormously because the best breakfast is not the most optimized one. It is the one you will actually repeat. Consistency beats perfection every single time. Start with about half a cup of rolled oats. Not the sweetened sachets, not the instant flavored packets. Just plain rolled oats. If your gut is sensitive or you are new to higher fiber eating, begin every other day rather than switching overnight. Give your system time to adjust. The goal is a slow build, not a fiber shock. That is the foundation, but a foundation is not the whole house. The next part is where people go wrong when they try to turn breakfast into some sterile fitness meal. They strip it down to just oats and protein powder, and they skip what might be the most important layer of all, fermented food. Plain kefir is my preference. Plain live yogurt is a very close second. And here is why this matters. Fiber is the food supply for your microbes, but fermented foods can help nudge the microbial community itself. Think of it this way. A neglected garden needs both compost and living seeds. The oats provide the compost. The fermented food brings the seeds. In the 2021 Stanford Cell Study, adults assigned to a fermented food-rich diet showed measurable increases in microbiome diversity and reductions in several inflammatory markers over 10 weeks. That is not a small or trivial finding. It was a well-designed study, and the results were meaningful enough to take seriously. Then, in 2024, a systematic review of fermented bovine dairy products, covering 15 human trials and more than 1,500 participants, found multiple studies reporting higher bacterial diversity and increased counts of beneficial species like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. That is not hype. That is a useful clinical signal. Now, here is where most people quietly undermine this entire step. They buy a strawberry-flavored yogurt that is loaded with added sugar and read like a dessert ingredient list. Your microbes are not fooled by the word probiotic on a label that is otherwise full of sweeteners. If the ingredient list reads like a milkshake, it is functioning like one. Reach for unsweetened kefir or unsweetened live yogurt, roughly 3/4 of a cup to 1 full cup. and let the fruit do the sweetening. Which brings us to the next piece. Because what goes on top of this bowl is not decoration. Berries are not there to make the bowl look good in a photograph. They are there because they carry something beyond fiber: polyphenols. And polyphenols have a relationship with your gut microbes that most nutrition conversations completely ignore. Here's how it actually works. Your gut microbes help break down and process polyphenols, and in return, polyphenols help shape which microbial species thrive. It is a two-way relationship, not a one-way delivery of nutrients. Think of polyphenols less like fuel and more like signals. Instructions being passed through a neighborhood, influencing who stays and who does not. In a randomized crossover clinical trial published in the Journal of Nutrition in 2022, adults with prediabetes who consumed red raspberries showed measurable shifts in their gut microbiota, including increases in beneficial species and reductions in microbes associated with poorer metabolic patterns. That is a striking result because it shows breakfast is not only about managing hunger. It is also about biological signaling that continues long after the meal is finished. Frozen berries work just as well as fresh ones. You do not need expensive berries shipped in from somewhere exotic. A large handful of mixed frozen berries is entirely sufficient. Rotate them across the week: blueberries one day, raspberries the next, blackberries when they are available. That variety matters because your microbiome, much like a healthy local economy, functions better when it is not dependent on a single source. One giant chain store on every corner is not diversity, and neither is blueberries every single morning with nothing else. We now have oats, we have fermented food, and we have polyphenols. But there is one quiet addition that changes the entire character of this breakfast. Seeds are where this meal stops being merely good and starts becoming dependably effective. I use ground flaxseed most often, sometimes chia, and sometimes smaller amounts of both. The reason I specify ground flaxseed specifically is this: if flax passes through your digestive system whole, it is a bit like mailing a package with the box still sealed. The nutrients are there, but they never become available. Grinding opens it up. Ground flax delivers additional soluble fiber and plant lignans, compounds that interact with the gut in ways that go beyond simple bulk. Chia adds gel-forming fiber that physically slows the pace of digestion, which matters because your gut microbes prefer a steadier delivery of material over time, a slow, consistent supply rather than a sudden flood. This is one of the most consistently overlooked parts of building a genuinely useful breakfast. People will spend significant money on a supplement with a futuristic label and dramatic marketing claims, and then skip the tablespoon of real food that quietly does the work every single day. In an open-label randomized trial in patients with ulcerative colitis published in Complementary Therapies in Medicine in 2019, 30 grams of ground flaxseed per day improved inflammatory markers and disease severity measures compared to control. That is a specific patient group, and I am not suggesting the results translate perfectly to everyone, but it supports the broader biological point that ground flaxseed is not nutritionally trivial. It interacts with the gut in real and meaningful ways. Start with 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed stirred directly into the bowl. If you already tolerate it comfortably, you can move to 2 tablespoons. And drink water consistently throughout the day. You already know this, but fiber without adequate fluid is like trying to mop a floor with a dry sponge. The fiber needs water to do its job properly. The bowl is almost complete, but this last addition matters more than most people expect. A small handful of walnuts on top. Not a large portion, not a trail mix situation, just enough to add texture, support satiety, and contribute another meaningful layer of plant compounds and healthy fats. Walnuts are one of the few nuts that have accumulated genuinely interesting human microbiome data. In a randomized controlled feeding study published in the Journal of Nutrition, healthy adults who ate 42 grams of walnuts per day showed measurable shifts in gut microbiota composition, including increases in butyrate-producing species, which again is quite remarkable for something people typically think of as just a snack. What this research reinforces is that a microbiome-supportive breakfast is not built on one superstar ingredient. It is built like an orchestra. Oats play one part, fermented dairy plays another, berries add a different note, seeds and walnuts widen the sound. And when you eat them together, consistently, breakfast begins to function as a pattern your gut can learn from and adapt to over time. If you prefer almonds, or pumpkin seeds, or pecans, those are all fine choices. There is flexibility here. I return to walnuts because the microbiome evidence is reasonably solid and the texture works well in this format. Use about 20 to 30 grams and chew them properly rather than scattering them on top and inhaling the whole bowl in 3 minutes. The chewing matters. It is where mechanical digestion begins, and skipping it costs you more than you might think. Now, before I walk you through the exact version I would make tomorrow, I need to address the most common and most costly mistake people make when they try to build this breakfast. Here is what usually goes wrong. Someone hears a message like this, goes home genuinely motivated, and builds what looks like a healthy bowl. But by the time they finish assembling it, it contains sweetened granola, flavored yogurt, a generous drizzle of honey, a handful of dried fruit, a large scoop of nut butter, and possibly some chocolate chips scattered on top for reasons they cannot fully explain. Then they tell me the microbiome bowl made them hungrier, that it caused bloating, that it did not work. Of course it did not work, because that bowl was never a microbiome bowl. It was pudding wearing a wellness badge. I keep this breakfast deliberately plain. Rolled oats, unsweetened kefir or live yogurt, berries, ground flaxseed, walnuts, and perhaps a little cinnamon. That is sufficient. If a low-protein breakfast tends to leave you raiding the kitchen by 11 in the morning, use thicker Greek yogurt or add 2 eggs on the side. Do not solve the protein problem by turning the bowl into a sundae. Simple is not the same as weak. In fact, simple is usually what sustains, because you can repeat it every morning without negotiating with yourself about whether it counts. And consistency is exactly what the microbiome responds to. The original Nature study showed that diet can begin altering gut microbial patterns within days. The Stanford research reinforced that repeated dietary exposure shapes microbial and immune outcomes over weeks and months. The lesson is not that one perfect breakfast repairs years of poor habits overnight. That would be absurd. The lesson is that one repeatable breakfast can begin moving the system in a better direction, faster than most people expect. There is one more thing I want to address before the recipe, and this may be the most important point of all. You have to match this breakfast to the gut you actually have, not the gut you wish you had. If you are dealing with significant bloating, chronic constipation, active inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, or if you are recovering from a course of antibiotics, the same bowl may need meaningful adjustment. Some people do much better starting with smaller fiber doses and building slowly. Some need lactose-free kefir, or a non-dairy cultured option that still contains live cultures. Some tolerate oats beautifully, but struggle with chia in the first week or two. That does not mean the approach is wrong. It means biology is personal. In 2024, Stanford researchers reported that human microbiomes are far more individualized than previously understood, which explains clearly why one person thrives on a food and another needs a more gradual introduction to the same thing. If your gut is reactive, start conservatively. A quarter cup of oats, a few spoonfuls of live yogurt, 1 tablespoon of berries, half a tablespoon of ground flaxseed. Build from there over 1 to 2 weeks. Do not treat this as a challenge to push through. Treat it as a calibration. As for how quickly you might notice a difference, bowel regularity can improve within days for some people. For others, the early signals are quieter. Less bloating after meals, less urgency, a more stable appetite, steadier energy through the morning without a hard crash. Those softer changes often arrive before the more obvious ones, and they matter just as much. Pay attention to them. Here is exactly how I would build this breakfast tomorrow morning. Half a cup of rolled oats soaked overnight in about 3/4 of a cup of plain kefir. In the morning, add a generous handful of mixed berries. Frozen is completely fine. Stir in 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed. Add a small handful of walnuts on top. Finish with a little cinnamon if you like it. If I wanted the bowl thicker, I would use plain live Greek yogurt as the base with a small amount of kefir stirred through. If I needed more protein, I would have 2 eggs on the side, not syrup in the bowl. If my gut was going through a sensitive period, I would have the flaxseed and reduce the berries for the first several days before building back up. That is it. No powders, no detox language, no ingredient with a price tag that requires a separate budget line. Does this breakfast repair the microbiome in some magical overnight way? No. But if repair means feeding beneficial microbes consistently, increasing fermentable fiber, introducing fermented foods, widening your plant compound diversity, and helping the gut produce a better set of metabolites, then yes, this is as strong a breakfast template as I know. And because the microbiome responds to repeated dietary patterns faster than most people realize, it is one of the few breakfasts where genuine digestive benefits can begin appearing within days, while deeper changes continue to build over weeks and months. That is exactly the kind of approach I trust most: simple, reproducible, anchored in evidence, and human enough to actually maintain. Thank you for watching. If this was useful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who is still trying to fix their gut with expensive supplements instead of a better breakfast. I have done other videos on gut health, blood sugar, and the foods that quietly drive inflammation. So take a look around the channel when you have time. Your microbiome pays attention to what you do every single day, and breakfast is one of the clearest, most consistent conversations you get to have with it. I will see you in the next one.